죄송합니다. 다음 세션 시작해야 해요. 박할아버지, 할아버지 미안해요. 고맙습니다. Okay, so the moderator for session 3 will be law professor from Central Michigan, Central Michigan University, Hope Elizabeth May.
So we will begin this third session. We're beginning relatively on time, so this will go into 4 o'clock. And our first speaker is Professor Grant McCall from the University of Sydney. I think all of the speakers should come up. Okay. Next we have Professor Chgo, speaking about the registering of the records of 1947, and then Professor Yoshida, who you met this morning, talking about Jeju reparations.
So I've got a little timer here, and it starts now, and that's what I'm going to talk to. Okay, folks, from tragedy, peace will come. That's the title, that's who I am. And if you want to contact me, if you have any questions, keep them to yourselves. No, I'm just joking. If you have any questions, please ask. Go, he'll tell you all about it. And this is supposed to make it go. No. Should. Maybe it's off, maybe it's on. Turn it one way, turn it the other way. Look, I tell you what, I know what I'm going to say. So it doesn't matter if we don't have the pictures. Turn it on. Ah, that's the tricky part. Okay, it's turned on. Thanks very much. If you ever need anything practical done, don't ask a bloke to do it. Ask a woman. They always know. Isn't that so, ladies? You know. We just put up a good show, don't we? We blokes. Don't tell anyone that. Jeju is a long way from Chicago. I didn't fly from there, but a few people here did. That's a long, long way. But nevertheless, in terms of North Asia, Jeju is right in the center of North Asia. And I'm going to make a lot of that as I go through this talk. In fact, I better put my specs on so I can see what I wrote. But you can see the distances there. Jeju, as you know, was declared by the Korean government as Jeju Peace Island. So my talk is really about promoting Jeju as a place where peace can be discussed, where peace can come about Not on Jeju itself, necessarily. That will also be the case. But in terms of the region. Now, I argue, I'm an anthropologist, but I study contemporary populations, and I think one of the oldest drives in human civilization, when we got down out of the trees, came out of the caves, and even when we were still wandering the plains of the Middle East, was the search for peace. And how did we go about doing that? We developed meeting places for peace. And we still have some of them today. Places for peace. And I'll show you one that is 12,000 years old. A place for peace started 12,000 years ago. Well, the 4.3 of the Sasam, of course, is state terrorism. It's the state pushing onto its own population, onto the population that the state is supposed to protect. We live in states today. It's a bargain that we make with states. The state looks after us, so we're safe. But in return for that, the state is supposed to look after us. We're supposed to be loyal to the state. But when you have state terrorism, when the state takes it against you, and it does from time to time, things like Sasam take place. When the state on which you expect is going to look after you suddenly becomes your enemy. And this state terrorism was imposed on what some people have called the island of many gods. And that's Jeju, of course. 2005, Jeju was declared Peace Island, and so it remains today. On top of that, in 2007, Jeju was declared self-governing of the 9 provinces of Korea, South Korea. Of the 9 provinces, Jeju is the only self-governing one. And that's important because it gives it a certain autonomy, a certain way of being within Korea, which I'm going to argue for in a moment. So those of you will be familiar with the leader of China, President Xi, and his declaration a few years ago of the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative, according to President Xi, is not located in any one country. He says it's not an intentional, it's not intended to be some kind of a Chinese imposition on the world, but something to benefit the world. And in a style which is reminiscent of Fidel Castro, he gave a 3.5-hour speech. Don't worry, my speech is not going to be 3.5 hours. But he gave a 3.5-hour speech, which is online and you can read it. Well, I think people on Jeju might want to take, the government of Jeju might want to take President Xi as his word and offer Jeju Island to be the buckle of the belt and to be the intersection of the crossroad. Jeju Peace Island is the intersection. The terminus of the ancient Silk Road. We talk about globalization today, but of course globalization was going on a long time. These days, if you want to get on a plane, if you want to travel to some place, you've got to have a passport, don't you? And you have to have an airline ticket, go out to an airport and all that. But in the past, people just took off. And they did, and that's how our human species came to inhabit the entire globe. The terminus of the ancient Silk Road, which united Europe and Asia, it united Europe and Asia 2,000 years ago, brought products back and forth. Next time you go to an Italian restaurant, as some of us did last night, don't be surprised if you see things on your plate that look as though they could be in a Chinese restaurant. Because the Italians don't tell anyone, the Italians copied the Chinese. Shh. They did too, and brought a lot of products back and forth. But the terminus of the Silk Road was called Perpetual Peace and Constant Peace. Yet again, peace figures in these major kind of trade and governance issues. This is Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It's a reconstruction, of course. Some people are calling this a temple, but there's no altar. It's a place for discussion. And when this was built 12,000 years ago, when this was built 12,000 years ago, that's a long time. When it was built all that time ago, there were no cities anywhere in the world. There were certainly no cities anywhere near Göbekli Tepe. There weren't even people living at Göbekli Tepe. They were tribes of people who walked over or hunted and gathered all over what is today Turkey. And they got together to build this monument where they could come together and prosper instead of fighting each other. Göbekli Tepe, to my mind, it's the first megalithic construction, and it's a megalithic construction for peace, and we can learn from that. So what is to be done? Peace Island. How can you have Jeju Peace Island when there's a naval base on the island? You can solve that problem. They've built a nice base there. It's a good harbor. It's nice and safe. Why not convert it into a peace harbor? A peace harbor on Jeju Peace Island, under multinational supervision, just like the Silk Road. The Silk Road was not one government. It was a series of governments, a series of populations cooperating for peace. An idea that Professor Chgo and I have talked about, with no self-interest at all, of course, is that this peace port would be the home of the Jeju Peace Island cruise ship. Who wants to go on a peace cruise? Anybody interested? Yeah, there's one in the back already interested. Okay, we'll sign you up. And another one there, you see? A peace cruise. There are a couple of peace boats in the world today. We can't have too many of them. And this one will be sailing from Jeju Peace Island. If you turn around, you'll see a lovely sight on the table behind you, because at 4 o'clock when we have our break, we're going to participate in Mandarin diplomacy. Do you know what that is? Mandarin diplomacy, when Jeju Peace Island sent Mandarin oranges to North Korea and carrots. So to go with the Mandarin oranges, they're not, I'm sorry, from Jeju, they're from California. To go with that, we have a carrot cake. So you're participating. By eating that, you are participating in that initiative. And why not? Why not invite a star, a person that's very rare? You know, if you look around the leaders of the world today, there are not a lot of movie stars amongst them. Maybe Mr. Trudeau, yeah, I'll grant you that, good-looking bloke. But what about the leader of North Korea's sister, who came to the Winter Olympics? What about inviting her to come to Jeju Peace Island and participate in a bultuk, which is a unique governance form on Jeju Island, practiced by the Henyo, who you heard about earlier today. Wonder how she would go. Certainly there would be photographs taken. And I was just speaking to my colleague at Sydney University. We never met, but now we meet here, of course, about K-pop. Well, did you know that North Korea has K-pop? Quite skillful. Look it up on YouTube. A very skilled group of, it's a female band. What about exchange between musicians? Doesn't always have to be exchange between politicians. Popularize, as you participated later on, the Jeju Peace Island cake. It's a carrot cake made at Whole Foods. And offer Jeju Peace Island as a site for the Belt and Road. Test the Chinese will. Is it really going to be multinational? Why not locate it on Peace Island? And finally, as these things are accomplished, as Mr. Trump, well, the less said about him, the better, as Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim come together to avoid difficulties on the Korean Peninsula. What about, just imagine, nominating Jeju Peace Island for the Nobel Peace Prize? Is it possible? It should be. And to use the famous, one of the things that took me to Jeju Island first, about 12 years ago, when Professor Ko and I met, were these ancestor figures. As an example of governance, these stood in pairs to the entrance of traditional villages. So, my final word, and Michael should be pleased, because it's only 13 and a half minutes. My final word, make Jeju Peace Island Mandarin-topped carrot cake, not war. And the carrot cake itself, as I said, is at 4 o'clock for you to participate in this Mandarin diplomacy. You don't even have to leave the room to be part of Mandarin diplomacy. And final word, as we come up to 14 minutes and 20 seconds. Thank you. Shall I sit down and be quiet?
We have our second speaker, who's Professor Ko. He will speak about registering the 1947 records in the UNESCO Memory Project. Thank you very much.
What would you like me to say? Down at the end.
I think so.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. In my speech, I just think about how we share with truth of Jeju Sasam with world citizens, and so one of my alternatives to register. So 1947 records of legal case and of 328 people involved in the demonstration into one of the UNESCO World Program of Memory. It's just a long sentence, but I just think one of the tasks we must think about why Jeju Sasam becomes human spirit speak with world citizens beyond tragedy. So I just I suggest four kind of regions to you, and I want to share with some regions with you. One of them just Jeju 4.3 will be become a human speak alive, and is just become a source of peace and policy agenda. And so the first of all, Jeju Sasam has a moral probably moral relevance, and just
hope may emphasize in some relationship, relevance of pre-United Nations history to the Jeju tragedy. So he just explained why it happened. And so also, so that's the reason Jeju 4.3 have a moral relevance through Korean modern history. Also, Bishop Kang emphasized exploration enough to you in morning time keynote speeches. And also, secondly, Jeju 4.3, it happened a big tragedy. We just experienced big tragedy during peacetime Korea, during 1947 to 1954, around 7 years, 7 months. They have experienced hardships, lamentation, and survive. How to survive? And you saw Hwang Soo-kyung already give us some examples. Widows survive during Korean War, during 4.3 peacetime. So that's the story of Jeju peoples to recover their human spirit through their struggles to long-standing and truth-finding activities. So that's another reasons Jeju 4.3 becomes peace and Paris agenda. So thirdly, we can each time we can share with truth of Jeju 4.3 tragedy with world citizens. I have been to visit New Haven in 2016, just New Haven teachers want to make world civilization curriculums for 9th grade high school students in New Haven. So I just I gave my around 8 hours teachings to them. So we talk about the lessons from Jeju 4.3 tragedy. And they New Haven teachers Jeju 4.3 recognize Jeju 4.3 as one of worldwide genocide. And the other, they have emphasizing Jeju people's peace and human rights movement through their struggles. Even though long time, even though so hard, it makes some hardships, they can do it. So we can say human spirit of Jeju people's oriented, Jeju people initiative, human rights movement. That is, I call it peace and human rights movement. So I just that's the reason why I registered March 1947 March 1st Jeju Liberation demonstration. Probably it succeeded. 1990 Korean National Liberation Day, liberation struggles demonstration through non-violence struggles spiritually. So that's the reason. So I hope we can think about this lessons, this task, and we can do and to do something more good things and through collaborative leadership. I hope we can do it. Thank you.
So we're just setting up the PowerPoint, and so this is Professor Yoshida from Chgo University, talking about reparations.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for this occasion. Chicago is nostalgic for me. About a generation ago, I had a chance to study overseas for my first time at Northwestern here with my first mentor, the contract scholar, about his relational theory. And he's Professor Ian McNeil, his name is one of the most original contract thinker after Lon Fuller at Harvard. And but I'm moving around. I'm jack of all trade, and irrespective of the difference of the field, the relational perspective is my common thread when I work on different issues. And today I'll talk about reparations, reconciliation. Reconciliation is to think about how to stop the vicious cycle of hatred, how to get back to normal the antagonistic relationship that's ubiquitous across the world. Okay, let's start. And I already started my self-introduction. I'm in civil law, but I'm working on reparations in the East Asian context as one of my research projects. For example, I'm working on Chinese and Korean slave labors. And a couple of years ago, I stayed with Professor Norman Field, sitting over there at Shimarinai. That's the symbolic place of Korean slave labors in Hokkaido. There used to be 150,000 Korean slave workers shortly before the end of World War II. And there used to be 58 out of 135 Chinese slave labor sites in Hokkaido. There are a lot of tragedies, and that brings about reparations issues. And reparation with regard to Jeju mass killing is also a good example to think about the process of reconciliation, even though we are facing a lot of challenges. And many people might ask me why you, as a Japanese legal scholar, are concerned with Jeju mass killing. And I explain why. First, as Bishop Tom mentioned, there's a strong relationship between Japan, especially the Osaka area, the ethnic Korean, and the Jeju people. About 1/4 of the residents Korea in Osaka area are from Jeju. And partly because, as you mentioned, there's a ferry boat running from 1922 through 1945. And that figure is contrasted with the fact that the population of Jeju is only 1% of Korean population, including North Korea. And due to Jeju tragedy, many Jeju Islanders escaped the tragedy and moved to Japan. Now they are facing racial discrimination and hate speech in the Japanese society. For example, I met with this famous narrowly escaped Jeju tragedy in those days in 1949. And Kim Si-jong, he's very famous, and I think he's a good candidate of the getting Peace Award. Yeah. He's already 90 years old. And Miss Kim Dong-il, she's also narrowly escaped the Jeju tragedy, and he's running a mom and pop store, bento store in Edogawa Ward in Tokyo. But in her case, she is not classified as victims of the 2000 special statute, and her honor has not been recovered. This is the picture taken when she attended the memorial in 2008 after several decades. And second, there's a similarity of violence between Japanese army and Korean army backed by the U.S. You know, the Korean army who killed so many Jeju islanders in those days used to be the Japanese soldiers until the end of World War II. So the type of violence is similar. And the number of victims in Jeju massacre is shocking. Officially, 30,000, but from the Japanese literature, I've learned the number of victims was much more. And the way they were slaughtered is beyond description. It's a Korean Holocaust. And the peaceful territory project of Franklin Roosevelt that was compatible with Jeju Islanders' idea was substituted by the confrontational plan of Harry Truman, as many of you know. And this is a picture about the Korean Holocaust without, as they mentioned, without any legal trial. And third, the research on Jeju mass killing started earlier in Japan as a Japanese issue. You know, as I mentioned, 1/4 of the resident Korean in Osaka area are from Jeju. And earlier because the Jeju issue had been a taboo through 1990s. And Professor Ko himself, when he was director of research, April 3rd Research Institute, when the Taranshi cave was discovered in 1992, he was intimidated. He was besieged by the KCIA and the Korean police, and he had to hide